Hello viewers, welcome to Media Track 8. My friend Frederick Noronha will start today's discussions.
So to take an issue, Devika, which is from outside of Goa, far away, actually halfway around the world almost, the Prime Minister of Portugal, who is partly Goan, comes in for elections, Antonio Costa. He is facing election soon. And last week we had a guest here who was the ex-president of the Casa de Goa, and he's advocate Edgar Valles, and he was also giving us an insight into what's happening in Portugal. So since we have such a strong colonial connect, if you wish, with Portugal, and we have a person who is part Goan sitting as a prime minister for almost a full term now, and conducting it very successfully, may I say. He his role intrigued me into finding out what was happening there, and I actually came across these two reports, one of which is from financialtimes.com, which says that in the context of Europe's complications and Brexit and all these problems that they are facing, Portugal right now offers some hope to Europe in that sense. So they are actually looking up to Portugal compared to the other countries of the region, which is very different from the Portugal that Goa knew in the 60s, which was like the poor man of Europe,
Right.
in that sense. And the other report is from Reuters, which says that the Prime Minister rules out a coalition. He is from the Socialist Party, and he has been in some kind of an alliance or understanding with the other left parties, which is the Communist and the left bloc, what they call the left bloc. So he hopes, some of his supporters, including Mr. Valles, were saying that there are chances that the Socialists might get a majority of their own, or even if they don't, they may not have a coalition, but they may have some understanding, they may continue their understanding. And I think one point that Mr. Costa made was that why ruin, this is the way he put it, why ruin a good friendship with a bad marriage, something to that effect.
Okay.
So, their politics are very complex, we don't understand it too well, but it's interesting because here's a man from Goa who has, gone and achieved so much there.
Right. I'm sure their politics can't be as complex as what's happening in Britain today. But to just get back to your story, there was this thing I read recently about a minister from Portugal making a statement, and this will come as good news to so many people from Goa who have taken the Portuguese passport, that they actually welcome immigrants into Portugal right now. So that would open the door to a lot more Goans to look at Portugal as an alternative.
But there were all kinds of feedbacks to this. Some on the online media, social media, were comparing the kind of wage levels in Britain and in Europe and in Portugal, which are lower than in parts of Europe. Plus the language issue is there, so it also reminds us that there are all kinds of complications here, and the Goa diaspora story is very fraught with a whole lot of risk, and we've seen it happen in Kuwait, in Iraq, in East Africa. So I think it's something that needs to be on the agenda.
Yes, I know that's a fact, but don't forget that there are problems all over the world. True. And whichever country you choose to settle in, I'm sure that you might find some way to find a foothold.
And Goans have been survivors in that sense, wherever, despite all the kind of problems and some of the most devastating issues and all they've managed, they've come up on top, they've landed on their feet.
True.
And even the expulsion from East Africa, many of them, when they were looking back after 25 years, not long back, they said that we are probably better off because of that.
That's true. Now I want to start with the story that was the big story this week. It was a national story. It was the merger of 10 public sector banks. They were merged into 4 entities, and it was a huge decision. In a sense, it was a huge announcement, but coupled with that was the fact that India's Q1 growth slumped to over 6-year low of 5%. And there was a lot of criticism in the media and across the board. Analysts, economists, etc., said that this was only a way for the central government to take away the attention from the bad economic situation that India is currently going through, So some of the comments that came from economic analysts, one of them is of course Swaminathan Ankleshwar Iyer, and he was saying that while the measures are in the right direction, they are only a these are only a short-term fix, and it ignores the structural reasons for India's economic slowdown. And a former RBI governor also was saying, this is mere distraction from what is really going wrong in the Indian economy. So the other big story, of course, that Rico, you might also want to weigh in, is the way the monsoon has played out in Goa, and of course across the country too. They've been
across
having
the world,
across the world, of course. But right now we've crossed 135 inches, and Bombay also had a huge battering, and they had almost 9 inches of rainfall in a single day. And as usual, Mumbai just totally shut down and schools were closed. Now, this has been the wettest period during July, August in 25 years in India. And the surplus rainfall was a dramatic change from the monsoon's performance in June, which had a 33% rain deficit. And in Goa, we've already had 26% surplus rain. So it's sort of, the word might seem a little odd, but it's giving everybody cabin fever, I think, including us. The fact that you're not allowed, you can't go out and do your usual.
I've noticed that when it rains heavily outside, we have a much more glamour appearance on the screen here. But to give credit where credit is due, the Met Office in Goa did a fairly good job this time in predicting that we would have heavy rains between September 1 and 4. And I think they were spot on. Except that they said it will be in isolated places on Goa, whereas it was throughout the state. I was also watching, this pictures from Bahamas where typhoon has hit them, and it's really, a terrible scene there. So it looks as if it's been bombed out, like the full place, and I'm sure there must be some Goans staying in Bahamas. We had one friend, Jose Colasso, if you remember him, a doctor.
So
who was on,
in the Bahamas,
he passed away. Incidentally, by the way. So I think weather is a very serious issue. Okay, Goa can ask the center for more funds. That's one way of looking at it. But the other problem is, what are we doing in the long run, in terms of drainage, in terms of housing, secure housing, in terms of planting trees. I don't know where the solution lies. But if everyone does a bit, I read about Ethiopia planting some millions of trees in 24 hours as their solution towards global warming.
Well, the story I'd like to just bring up next is the JNU, that is Jawaharlal Nehru University, asking renowned historian Romila Thapar to submit copies of her CV so that the university can evaluate her work and decide. Now, there's been a lot of sort of, the whole Twitter and social media has erupted over this, and there's been a lot of criticism. So, Romila Thapar has a doctorate from University of London. She has taught in Delhi University for many years, and she was made JNU Professor Emerita in 1993. That's some 26 years ago. She has written several books. She's a very, very well-known historian. So some people saw in this, a kind of political motive. This is, one comment was, this is literally how democracy dies, not in the crumbling halls of colonial buildings, but in the silencing of the keepers of memory. And there's been a lot of comment even from, columnists. And a related story, of course, is the bail application that came up for Vernon Gonsalves. Vernon Gonsalves is one of the activists that was arrested more than a year ago over that Bhima Koregaon incident, which happened in Pune, and they were not even present there, by the way. So a whole lot of, over 1,000 books were confiscated from Vernon and Susan, his wife, from their home. And among them was a copy of a book called War and Peace, And so the judge in the case, a Bombay High Court judge, said that such books prima facie indicate that this is material against the state. Of course, the judge later on clarified that he wasn't referring to Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace.
But he said he made a comment somewhere about
yes,
foreign books.
He did think a foreign war. He
foreign
talked.
War.
Why should you be interested? But there's been this whole reaction to this case, and you had Shobha De commenting on it, and she said that books have become so dangerous these days that reading can be injurious to your freedom.
And my own take on this, Devika, my conspiracy theory, if you like, is that of course these are very serious issues and it does hurt the people who are involved, and it makes a whole lot of people also outrage over the over the social media, but it tends to distract us from more serious issues like the economy and the real fundamentals which I think are something that we cannot escape.
That is exactly the point the former RBI governor, writing in the Indian Express on Thursday, has made, that even the bank mergers is a distraction from what is really going on wrong in the country, and that is the way the economy is being handled by this government.
So somewhere on the bank mergers, talking about that, I recall reading a comment that even if there are multiple branches on the same road, they will not close them.
Yeah.
I don't know what purpose that serves, because as far as the employees are concerned, they want to avoid job losses. They are not worried, what are the brand names outside the banks and things like that.
So I think the problem is far more complex than that, because I was reading some of the analysis, and they talked about how this actually holds back the performance of the bank, because they're so bothered about amalgamating them and getting all the staff into the thing and training them all over again to work together, that it actually impedes the performance of the bank.
People from our generation don't know what failing banks mean, because ever since nationalization and all, whatever it is, the banks have been fairly afloat, but my parents and all that, they used to talk about for banks which just come, they offer all kinds of goodies, take your money and run away, and I hope we don't return to those days. So, one of the just lighter stories that came up, since we are discussing so much serious stuff, is about this Center for Indo-Portuguese Performing Art, which has just come up in Panjim, very close to where our studio is. And they plan to, have shows there, have events there, music and all kinds of things. I think 60 years almost after 1961, it's time that we turned our back on the bad side of the relationship and look at where these bridges could be built. So that's one of the things.
Yeah, actually I did go there some days ago, and I was quite curious. There were these two completely differing worlds. On one side was the place run by Noronhas, and on the other side of the road are the casinos, and it's like two worlds apart, divided.
It couldn't be more different, no?
It couldn't have been more different, yeah.
Another very interesting page which I came across in the newspapers comes from the Goan. So the Goan is one of the smaller papers in the state. Unfortunately, as we were talking just before the program, when there's a smaller paper involved, it often gets not noticed, because everyone reads the main paper or the second paper, or third. This is probably the fourth in terms of seriousness. But when I opened one particular page, I found 2 or 3 very interesting stories on that one page. The first one was about the Minister Michael Lobo making this statement that he is not behind the Facebook group which is campaigning for him to become Chief Minister. Lobo denies having hand in Facebook page projecting him for Chief Ministership. Yeah. Says the page is run by his opponents who are trying to instigate the BJP and CM against him.
But frankly, Lobo doesn't need to even have a Facebook page. I attended a function where he was on stage, and this was before he became a minister, and somebody said, Michael Lobo, you do so well, you as Chief Minister. He said, yes, I will become Chief Minister. I have the intention. One day I will be Chief Minister. So obviously he has such ambitions.
Power of positive thinking. And on the same page there were 2 other reports on, one is by the shack owners threatening to move court if their shack policy is not reviewed. While it may sound very rational that all kinds of controls are coming in to make sure that they offer good food and all, I think like it's a bit unfair that the small players in the field are facing the squeeze, and the big guys can get away with what they want. And the last one which I saw on this page was about citizens threatening to move the court against a waterfront building which is being taken over and repurposed and things like that. So there are a lot of interesting stories coming even in the smaller press.
They do. Even the Marathi press, which we don't get to look at too much. But the other story that has just sort of crept in is the steep fines that are going to be imposed on people who drive cars and scooters and bikes and all for violating traffic rule violations, and the fines are really steep. So driving without a license that would get you a fine of 500 has been made 5,000. Driving without a seat belt, which was 100 rupees fine, is now 1,000. Not wearing a helmet, 100 rupees is now 1,000. And don't even think that you will escape this, because on the very same day that the fines came into into being, so to speak, two people in Gurugram were fined heavily. Both of them were riding bikes, and
25 or 27,000 or something like that.
Each one together they paid an amount of some 47,000. So cumulatively the fines of 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 and all that, both of them paid something like 24, 23,000 each. So that's one big story for everyone to look out for. The second one that was, I thought, quite interesting was the IIT that was supposed to be set up in Sangay, and there was a lot of confusion over the land and acquisition of the land. The people who own the land were protesting, so the government overnight decided to move it to Satari, and it will come up 17 kilometers away from Valpoi in a place called Satari, which is called Guleli. And who is extremely happy about it, of course, is Vishwajit Rane. He said it will transform his constituency, which is a backward, according to him, is a backward area, etc. It will bring jobs and things. But the MLA of Sangay, Prasad Gaunkar, is extremely upset because he had sort of really backed the whole project, and he said Sangay is one of the most backward regions of Goa, and it would have really helped development in the area.
Another issue which caught my eye was about the Pope's visit. The Pope is visiting 3 African and regional countries: Mozambique, Madagascar and Mauritius. As usual, the Pope is the current Pope Francis is a person who's quite likable and quite he knows to deal with the press, he knows to deal with the social media.
Absolutely. He's got a rock star image.
Yeah, rock star, yeah, that's true. So, some of the images that I saw, one was of him receiving a cap from one of the journalists, which, it looks like one of the very outlandish caps, and he has absolutely no problem on putting it on. He doesn't take himself too seriously. He's quite a likable person in that sense. And of course in Mozambique there was one angle which came up where some sections of the society said that his visit was a little bit badly timed because they are coming up for elections, and it could be seen as a endorsement for the ruling party, that kind of thing, and the debate was going on. So
there was this story I was looking at, and it has to do with the complete lack of jobs in Goa. So the story appeared in the Times of India, and it talked about this 1,100 jobs that had been advertised in Goa Medical College, and there were these huge queues of people just queued up there to collect the forms. And just a day before, there was another report which talked about 1,200 applicants competing for 4 civil service posts in Goa. Now, on the negative side is the fact that only 0.2% of those who applied in 2017 and 0.05% of candidates last year managed to clear the computer-based entrance recruitment exam. So it's a question I think we should ask the educationists and the education minister in Goa. Why are our standards, education standards, still so low? Because we've again fallen in the grading system. We've fallen back again, and now we are in the lowest rung according to this HRD ministry's new report. So obviously there's a lot of things that are wrong with education.
Added to it, Devika, you also have the craze for government jobs, which are seen as a kind of panacea and easy kind of money, which I have my doubts on. I mean, a government job is fine, it gets you money, but it's also boring work. It's not the kind of work you enjoy. There's no guarantee that you will be creative when you're in the job. Added to it, a complete lack of diversity among our young people. The options that they have to specialize in different fields. If we give them more options, I'm sure they would find their own way out.
But the options must also be correlated with higher education of some quality, and there must be those kind of jobs available to people.
Because
also.
Goa is a costly place to stay, and the kind of jobs that you get don't really tally with the kind of cost of living, in that sense. So one small comment which I came across on the political front was the Chief Minister saying that the financial situation of the state is stable. Goa has been borrowing in the past and it continues to borrow. It's not gone beyond the limits of borrowing. So I mean, all good arguments, but at the end of the day we also need to make sure that the fundamentals and financials of the state are in decent state.
Well, let me bring back the focus to the tourism industry, which is celebrating a bit after a very long gap of depression in the thing. We are going to get charters from Poland after a 5-year gap, and the industry seems to think this will make up for the loss of charters from Russia. So if you look at the numbers, you look at the figures, the charters dropped from 981 charters to 913. And somebody was saying, in fact, one of the tourism stakeholders was saying that there was a serious decline of, say, 30% in foreign arrivals. At the same time, there's another report which talks about there being a huge surge in tourists even during the monsoon, which you would think should be good news for the people who run hotels, but there was a lot of negative reaction to it, and so one of the stakeholders pointed out that while the increase is one thing, they don't really bring in much economic benefits. In fact, they generate more garbage than economic, because he's calling them the low-end tourists who come in big buses, and they just buy liquor from retail outlets, and they sit on the beach and drink, and they want the government to do something about this. The government has of course promised to and said that you can't drink in public, but somehow no one really takes it seriously.
Talking about which, Mahindra's has announced a road trip to Goa from different cities across India sometime in November or December. So we can expect a whole lot of jeeps coming here also. Of course, there's this love-hate relationship where tourism is a trade-off, where you get something and you give something, and sometimes you feel that what you're giving is not commensurate with what you're getting in that sense. Another story is of this young boy who is a chess champ. I think he has featured on CCR TV. His name is Leon Mendonça, and he was under training in Russia recently, one of the 6 Indians chosen and taken there. He's just 13 years old and already international master. So it's something positive coming out of there. Another very odd story is about this curse from Chandor, which came out in the local papers, where young women are not willing to get married to the guys from part of the village.
No, I saw that story, and I said, what is this about? I mean, it's quite
so apparently
bizarre, in fact.
The late Olivinio Gomes, who has written a book on Chandor called Village Goa, he has commented or noted this curse, which has one queen saying that whichever girl marries into the village, some bad luck would fall on her family. In I think Kota or one part of the village. So the boys from there go outside rather than stay in the village. And while that was being discussed on social media, someone else commented that we in Anjuna, this is Bernice Pereira made a comment that we in Anjuna have our own belief that if you build more than one story, bad luck falls on your family. I'm not, one way or the other taking any stands on these beliefs. Beliefs are beliefs. But I wish we had more such beliefs. At least Goa would remain flat and not high rise like some of the ugly parts of
I wish so too.
the world.
Well, I saw this really bizarre report which talked of Bengaluru to take a page from Goa on garbage management. I'd seen this report a day earlier also in the Bangalore paper, Deccan Herald, and it struck me as really odd because here we are, making so much noise about how badly we are doing in garbage management in Goa, and we had the case of the Sonsodor in
Sonsodor,
Margao.
Saligaon also, no?
Sonsodor, Saligaon, and there's still no place identified for the Panjim garbage to be dumped. The one place which they had is being objected to from all sides. So I don't understand how we've become such a great place for garbage management, but that is how governments
Maybe
work.
newspaper headline management, possibly.
Probably.
And since we are running out of time, one last small observation. I noticed that they are screening, if I read it right, if I read social media right, they are screening Natsuya Kumpasar at Asagaon, Asagaon. This 6 Asagaon is one of these places where they have meetings every Monday and discuss social issues and all. So they are having the screening of the film. So far, Natsuya Kumpasar was a very kind of restricted screening film because they were worried about piracy and they needed to recover their money. It was crowdfunded to the extent of 3 crores, where a whole lot of people put in their money and crowdfunded it. So now I hope and wish that it's going to the village areas, and it's a lovely film. If you haven't watched it,
I have. In fact,
I've watched it 3 times.
A very nice film, and I thought the music was great, and it's meant for everybody who loves Goa.
Yeah, that's true. So with that, the clock says we are out of time, and we'll wind up here. See you next week. We'll be back exactly in a week from now. Thank you.
Bye, and thank you.